Welcome everybody to this TCI Network Global webinar. As we've just heard from Natalia, this is TCI Network is a very powerful network in terms of connecting people to learn around policy related to clusters competitiveness. And one of the themes that we want to tackle in this global webinar is how cluster policies can be used as a tool for transformation, some of the most pressing challenges that are facing our territories, our societies around the world. And that's the aim of this session. My name's James Wilson. I'm Research Director at Orkestra, a long time TCI member. And I'm going to be facilitating the webinar together with my colleagues Emily Wise from Lund University and Madeline Smith, who also, we've been collaborating together in TCI for many years around issues related to cluster policy, its evaluation and its impacts. We're going to be facilitating this webinar to try and try and take us a little bit further in this discussion of how cluster policies can be used as a transformative tool, with three great speakers talking from practice, from different practical experiences around the world. And we aim to kind of use that practice to take us a little bit forward in the discussion. I'll start by briefly, my role is to introduce and frame a little bit the discussion at the beginning of this webinar. And then I'm going to hand over to Madeline, who's going to lead a guided conversation with our three speakers, posing a couple of questions to them to try and get into this issue. And then Emily's going to take over the facilitation to lead an open discussion, which we hope that many of you who are here as participants will participate. You can put your hand up, you can participate in the chat. You can put your hand up at any time, and then we can activate the microphone, etc., so that you can jump in. And then at the end of the webinar, TCI CEO Patricia Valdenebro will say some closing words and give you a little bit more information about next steps, the next events that we have coming up at TCI Network. Okay, so just to start off with, I think that many of us who are here, or most of us, I would say, are used to working with clusters in some aspect. Maybe there are some people who are not, but I think one of the things that brings us together is this understanding that clusters are a representation of the power of collaboration. They show us what can be done when different actors collaborate around common challenges. The diagram you see there is a depiction that we put together, Madeline, Emily, and I, for the TCI Network's evaluation guide a couple of years ago, in which you see that clusters might occur naturally. They do occur naturally within our economies. But sometimes they have support. They might have a cluster management organization that is charged with helping the clusters to collaborate. They might have a cluster policy, which is designed to support from government some of the activities of the cluster. But whether or not they are simply clusters that occur without any policy support, without any structure, whether they have a structure or whether they have a policy, they are tools for collaboration, and they are structures within our economies that support the achievement of collective goals. And we see certainly, in European context and around the world, that this is very well recognized. I show a map from Europe because we have good statistics on this in Europe, but I think this map could be drawn equally around the world, and you'd see something similar. You see that this is from the most recent European Cluster Panorama report, where we see that cluster organizations are present in most European regions. There are very few grey dots on that map, which is where there are no cluster organizations. And bear in mind that these are just the ones that are registered on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. So there are other organizations which perhaps are not yet registered that could add to that number. So we have a large presence of cluster organizations. And I think overall we can say that both the prevalence of cluster policies and cluster initiatives really highlights the value of collaboration for competitiveness. This is a popular tool because it seemed to be effective, and it's been demonstrated over considerable time to be effective. If we look at the issue of what do clusters do, they're most traditionally linked to competitiveness, economic competitiveness. And if we go back over the last 20, 30 years of our practice with clusters and our analysis of clusters, we'll see that the role of clusters has been predominantly oriented towards economic goals, towards trying to boost the economic dimensions of competitiveness, largely in traded activities, not so much in local activities or untraded activities, but traded manufacturing activities, traded services are the core where we see clusters really playing a strong role. And within that, they boost business competitiveness because they enable firms to collectively address some of the challenges that they struggle to tackle alone. So things such as innovation, internationalization, completing value chains, etc. Issues where alone an individual firm will struggle to necessarily, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, will struggle to necessarily make significant headway. When they're collaborating together, we can find some of these challenges can be addressed together. And if we look at some of the research on this, we'll see that both academic analysis and also the uptake of cluster type policies, they really do demonstrate the success of clusters in impacting competitiveness. The note you see there is to a research paper that, again, Madeline, Emily and I published a couple of years ago, in which we did a review of some of the literature on the benefits of clusters and evidencing the benefits, and tried to put those within a framework. And what we found is that there are lots of evidence of the benefits of clusters on economic competitiveness. However, there remain significant evaluation challenges. We haven't got to the end of our understanding. So there's lots still to do in terms of really understanding what makes clusters successful and exactly how they're successful in different contexts. One of the things that we really want to get into today, however, is to think a little bit beyond competitiveness, because I think we're fairly used to understanding the impacts that clusters have on economic competitiveness. And the evidence of that is fairly well documented. And I think as people who are interested in clusters, we can see that, we can see those impacts and that practice very clearly. However, if we look more broadly at where we are with economic development policy today, I think that we are acutely aware of the need for more radical transformation with our economies and societies, and that's reflected in a range of different developments. It's reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the impact that those have had over the last decade in terms of shaping economic development policy. It's reflected in language such as mission-oriented policies that's been used or pioneered by Mariana Mazzucato, who spoke at the TCI conference last year. It's also been reflected in a whole range of research around transformative economic development policy, or transformative science, technology, innovation policies. And there's a general understanding that economic development is not isolated from some of the more fundamental social challenges that we have in our society. And therefore, we need to understand how to be more radically transformative in what we're doing with policy. That's also very evident, I think, in the debate within Europe at the moment around, for example, the Draghi report that was published last September. There's a strong recognition that our future competitiveness, economic competitiveness, needs to go hand in hand with addressing the big societal challenges that we face. So Draghi focused very strongly on environment. Decarbonisation is one of the three core dimensions that runs through that report. He also talked a lot about security. As another, perhaps more significant societal challenge that in Europe we face at the moment. And a third one, which is not mentioned so much in the Draghi report, but I think is very relevant, certainly in my region and many regions around the world, is the issue of demography and how demographic transition, the aging of our societies, is creating fundamental challenges within the labour force on the one hand, also within healthcare systems, within welfare systems, etc. And these types of tensions are not easy to separate out from economic competitiveness as such. So what this is telling us, I think, is the need to look a little bit beyond the economic dimensions of competitiveness. And some of the research that Emily, Madeline and I have been doing on this in recent years has tried to understand how can clusters support this transformative agenda. And this kind of relatively simple table here tries to look at some of the characteristics of traditional cluster initiatives and think, well, what might those be like if we're talking about transformative cluster initiatives, cluster initiatives that are geared not only towards economic goals, but also to tackling some of these more societal challenges. So in terms of boundaries, we might think of new mixes of activities, broader geographies. In terms of the aim of cluster organizations, a shift from economic competitiveness to sustainable competitiveness, for example, both environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable. In terms of actors, we know clusters are based around the triple helix. Maybe other types of actors need to be involved in clusters for a more transformative setting. In terms of demand articulation, clusters in a traditional sense tend to follow market trends, use relatively linear innovations models, whereas perhaps transformative cluster initiatives need to look more towards challenges and more towards the integration of users in some of their dynamics and solutions. And when it comes to evaluation, how do we evaluate clusters rather than only looking at actor level capabilities and performances, how well firms are doing? We also need to think about tracking how clusters are impacting on systems and system level changes. So these are just some ideas on how clusters might support a transformative agenda to kind of kick off our thinking today. But what we really want to do in this webinar today is to build on some of the discussions that we started off in Reykjavik at the TCI conference in 2023 and continued last year at a policy workshop in Linz, and then again at the TCI conference in Chihuahua. And there you see a photo from, I think, from Reykjavik with some TCI members on the panel where we started discussing these issues. And we want to do two things. First of all, understand how the policy landscape is changing on the ground to facilitate socioeconomic transformation. So what are the needs from policy in terms of transformation? And then secondly, explore how cluster initiatives are contributing to that in practice. So what's happening in our regions in terms of our cluster organizations and their contribution to these broader societal challenges. And with that, without taking up any more of the time with this framing, I think I'll pass over already to Madeline, who's going to kick off the discussion around those two broad questions.
Thanks, James. That was really, really helpful framing of how we were wanting to take forward the discussion today. And we've got a great set of panelists from across the globe, as is ever with TCI. We managed to tap into a whole range of international partners who are working on some of the same challenges. And it's really good to pull together that learning so that we can, we're not working on this in isolation, but we're sharing that experience. I'm Madeline Smith. I'm based in Scotland in the UK. It's a sunny day in Scotland today, so I do apologise because we're not used to sun in Scotland, and so the camera is flickering a little. But hopefully you'll manage to see me and hear me. My background is I've worked across industry and with Scottish Enterprise in regional development. I've worked in academia with the Innovation School at Glasgow School of Art. So I feel as though I've had experience across the triple helix, and I know how sometimes it can be quite challenging to bring those different perspectives together. And I think the introduction that James just gave shows that we're now asking even more of clusters and possibly wider stakeholders to do more than just economic development and competitiveness. But it's a really important topic for us to understand how that might happen. So as I say, we've got three great panelists today to share their experience. I'm really grateful to the three of them for agreeing to be part of this discussion. First of all, I'll just give a quick introduction. So Stephen Furtick is the Acting Director General of the Government of Canada's Global Innovation Programme within the Strategic Planning, Policy and Partnerships Directorate. And the Global Innovation Clusters Programme, I think, is something that TCI has watched with interest because it's an ambitious programme with more than 2 billion Canadian dollars worth of federal funding investing in 5 national clusters. So a really ambitious programme. But Stephen's has had previous responsibilities in innovation, science and economic development around connecting regional economic development, interprovincial trade and regulatory reform. So it comes with a real strong background of how some of these challenges might be taken forward. So welcome, Stephen. We also have Annie Renders, who's head of Cluster Policy Unit at the Flanders Innovation and Entrepreneurship as part of the Flemish government, VLAU. And VLAU have very recently been improving and investing again in their Flemish cluster policy, and Annie has been right at the centre of this. She's come from a long background with the Flemish Agency of Innovation since 2000, looking at coordinating regional innovation ecosystems. So welcome, Annie. And more recently, she's just been elected to serve on the board of TCI. So we're very pleased to have that breadth of experience coming into the TCI board. And finally, on our panel, we have Natalia Sila, who's currently the CEO of the Competitiveness Agency of Cordoba in Argentina. That's a non-profit corporation that fosters collaboration between the public, the private, the academic sectors, so right at the core of clustering, with a mission to enhance the competitiveness of the business ecosystem and positioning Cordoba in the global stage. So welcome, Natalia. She says she has a passion for innovation and technology, and particularly interested in game-changing technologies such as artificial intelligence. So really interested to hear what your perspectives are on some of these aspects. So thank you all very much for joining our panel. And I'm going to move to the first question. James, I think you are still in control. So the first question I really wanted to ask the panel was, let's look at that changing context that James talked about. And so I'd really want to hear within your region or your country, what are the challenges that you're facing that is making an ask of this transformation? So, and how are you reacting to that? How are the policies being initiated to tackle this kind of challenge? And I'm going to bring in Stephen to start with.
So thanks very much, everyone. It's a it's a pleasure to join you today. So I'll start with that question about, how we got here in Canada, what challenge we were seeking to address at the time, and then get into that second element, which is, what are the emerging transformations that we're being asked to navigate here. So as mentioned, kindly, in Canada, we've taken some big steps to launch this global innovation clusters program. This was designed initially as something that's focused on competitiveness, inspiration. And in Canada, the diagnostic is that we have very strong capabilities generally in terms of research, in terms of academia, in terms of our innovation potential, but we have a relatively weak track record in translating academic research and innovations in the lab to turn into revenue generating companies that are scaling up, that are able to show a strong return on investment and be able to be companies that are driving growth and so on in the economy of the future. So the idea was, can we use clusters? Can we use the power of collaboration to be able to make linkages between some of our small innovative firms, to have them be married up as part of collaborative innovation technology development projects with larger companies that have the dollars to invest, that have the business cases, that are very shrewd companies with exacting standards that would be able to test drive some of these solutions, to implant them in their own business environment, and then try and help those companies that are able to provide those solutions then have a springboard to additional success as they market their solutions and refine them in other contexts. So that was the starting point, and this program is entering year 7 or so of its existence. And so we've been on a journey there where initially there were lots of efforts during the startup phase to really bring these 5 clusters that were funded in areas related to artificial intelligence, related to digital technologies, plant protein, ocean technology, and advanced manufacturing, to take these clusters that were just in their growth phase to work on their systems to collaborate with companies and to be able to unleash that innovative potential. And again, we started off with a significant investment, roughly a billion Canadian dollars over its first 5 years. The program was in turn renewed, and so in this second phase of the program right now, we've of course realized that life happens and that there are new and emerging priorities that we wanted as the federal government to be able to have integrated into the program. So some of those transformations that we've looked at most recently include some additional technology areas where we wanted to leverage these clusters to be able to help provide some directed support in key areas. So you can think of quantum technologies, where we've been leveraging a couple of our clusters, our digital cluster and our advanced manufacturing cluster, to try and work on that commercialization element as part of a separate strategy. The same thing with our artificial intelligence strategy. We've been leveraging the 5 clusters even to see how these transformative AI technologies can be implanted and commercialized within these 5 areas of focus. But we've also seen some almost social evolutions and environmental evolutions along the way. There's a recognition that to help foster the green transition, that we required in the second phase of the program for clusters to report on how their projects and initiatives and so on are helping to advance that green transition. So we've layered on that requirement. Also during COVID, you'll require that many companies encountered the fact that they had some supply chain challenges along the way, where they couldn't get gowns and masks and vaccines and different things, or different countries were hoarding certain products, and which meant that we encountered some supply chain challenges. So for these global innovation clusters, they were also asked to say, and what are you doing to strengthen high value supply chains within Canada, to reshore certain activities, or to work on resilience of supply chains, or improve demand forecasting to be able to ensure that we were meeting domestic needs. And maybe I'll give one further set of examples about how we've also included a requirement for the clusters to tell us about how they are including an inclusion element as part of their programming. So because there's a significant taxpayer contribution to the clusters, then on the flip side, there's a request and an expectation that the clusters respond to how they're making sure that these investments go not just to the usual suspect companies, but that benefit companies that are inclusive of women leaders, people from diverse backgrounds, people from different multicultural communities, etc. So we're trying not to be prescriptive by saying you must, ensure that at least X number of recipients are from this and this background. But instead, we're turning the tables and saying, you tell us as part of your annual report each time what measures you're taking to ensure that the dollars are invested in ways that further these inclusive goals. And maybe the final example I'll give is related to housing and home building, home construction. In Canada, we've had a very strong intake of immigrants over the recent years, and so we've seen a significant population growth, but we haven't in recent years seen the same pace of home building over that period, which has led to significant appreciation in the cost of housing for many Canadians, which has become a source of stress, particularly for younger generations who feel like the goal of home ownership and being able to make the transition from school and so on to family formation has been constrained a bit by the insufficient housing stock. And so in this case, when policymakers were thinking about what can be done to help accelerate some of the home building innovation, there is some money that was flowed through at least one of the clusters, our manufacturing cluster, who's been able to say, well, we're taking some of the technology innovations that we've been working on and applying this to a very concrete social challenge. And so those are a few of the examples of how in Canada we're seeing an evolution of our program to try and meet emerging needs. So maybe I'll stop there and we can hear from some of our other panelists.
Thank you, Stephen. It's really interesting to see that as a long-term investment in that program, there are more and more demands as context change and as challenges change that are this is important as a policy maker. And we want to see how all that investment is contributing to that. So this broadening of demand.
Thanks. And I should just, I'll just add one thing that, we can't ignore the current environment where in the US there are many different decisions that are being made in relation particularly to trade and tariffs and so on. And so we have every expectation that there will be a further soul searching about how can we use all of the federal government's tools, including our cluster program, to help companies pivot towards new markets, to ensure resiliency and so on. So as you say, a continuing evolution of the different environment. And we'll have to be on the ball to see how we can help support these additional transformations. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll bring in Annie. How are you seeing it within Flanders? What's the challenges that you're seeing that you need to have different policies to try and drive that transformation?
Well, maybe just to make the difference with Canada, Flanders is a rather small region with a very small and tiny central location in Europe. We are 6 and something million inhabitants living on 14,000 square kilometers. So it's a highly densely populated with, I think it's about 500 inhabitants per square kilometer. So it's by itself, being that small region, highly densely populated, is a challenge by itself, but it has always been a challenge. But over the last year, what we see changing is that the challenges that they become more global. We have always lived as a small region in this European context, but we see it even now going beyond Europe. So it's the challenges are not limited to Flemish challenges. It's really going global. It's not one sector, it's not one technological field. So it's broader. And James already brought it up, the European report, Draghi, the Draghi report is really putting is underlining these challenges for Europe, and it's about security, it's about sustainability, circular economy, the energy, also to reactivate the defense industry, how to do that in Europe, productivity, a very top priority also translated in Flanders is productivity. And clusters, well, they connect research to the application, as Stephen was saying, and they bring the results from the theory into practice, or research results to companies. But they also do the other way around. They bring the challenges from the industry, but also these global challenges. They translate it, what it can mean to do research on it. So that's kind of an interesting approach that our clusters are, well, that the government is taking up, and they see a role for the clusters in that. So the policy actions and the thematic areas are really the same, like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, social challenges like diversity. It's the same challenges. But the policy actions that we see coming up in Flanders are a lot about invest more in innovation. But investing more in innovation it was maybe seen as investing in research and development, but now it's also investing in how to transfer these new technologies to the industry, how implement these new developments in order to improve competitiveness, in order to prove productivity, to improve your productivity. So it's more like research and development is even more becoming a tool than becoming an objective by itself. So that's the change that we see in the policy actions, especially for these global challenges as productivity, or as how to use artificial intelligence. It's not about one technology, it's really the global approach. And also when we talk about the global challenge need a global approach, then we also see this happening, what also was mentioned in the slides that Emily showed, how you have to go from a triple helix with the government, the industry, and the research organizations, but how you go to a multiple helix ecosystem. Also involve your organizations with lifelong learning activities, how to upskill, reskill the workforces, how to involve civil society. We have these patients groups that are involved in the research done by our medical health cluster organization. So that's how to involve them. Also the investors, everything goes with time, and time is money. So the capital market is being closer, coming to these research and to startups and scale-ups. So that's also a policy action that has been taken in Flanders to address these global challenges. Also working with the non-governmental organizations. It's something actually that we were not so used to do, but it's becoming more and more practice also to have this voice of the community, to listen to them. And it's better to have them engaged before you come up with a solution than coming up with a theoretical solution that no one cares about to use. So that's why it's so important to have this multiple helix approach. So that's how we approach these global challenges in Flanders.
Thanks, Annie. It's really important points to talk about the fact that these challenges are all more global, and that we used to be able to look in our own context, and now the boundaries are blurring and are much more porous. And that whole thing about the multiple helix and co-designing with a whole range of different voices, I think is a really important aspect for some of these policies and how we tackle these challenges.
Yeah.
Finally, on this question, Natalia, I'm going to come to you. How does it look in Cordoba?
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to the TCI team and to all of you here today. It's a pleasure and privilege to be part of this global conversation on transformation. Well, I think we all have the same global challenges, but well, I'm speaking from Cordoba, Argentina, a region with strong talent, great entrepreneurs, and powerful industries. But we are at a crossroads. Our biggest challenge, we need to grow our economy faster, create better jobs, and help our businesses to compete globally, more than ever in this moment in Argentina and in Cordoba. So we strongly believe that generative AI is an opportunity, a game changer. It's not just a new tool. It's a new way of thinking, working, and creating value. We are living through a tech revolution like nothing we've seen before. AI is already transforming how we produce, how we work, how we connect to each other. And while we can't fully predict how far this will go, or the risk that and benefits it will bring, what we do know is that not preparing for it could be a mistake. Most of our institutions we see are not ready for this shift. But well, here in Cordoba, we are now trying to choose to act. We are learning by doing. We move fast, we adjust, and we try again, because we think the biggest risk today is standing still. That's why now this year, we launched Cordoba Exponential, a bold public policy to bring AI into the heart of our economy and institutions. We want to make it easier for our companies, clusters, and even the government teams to understand, test, and use Gen AI in their daily operations. We are focused on two big goals. First, accelerate AI adoption to make companies faster, more efficient, and more competitive. Second, help people to make the leap into jobs and opportunities of the future. Well, but what are we planning? We try to do it little by little, training CEOs and public leaders to spot real opportunities, practical things that we can do with AI. Second, running workshops and clinics for our clusters to identify real problems AI can solve today. Third, offering funding, co-investment, and global connections to turn idea into projects fast. Fourth, connecting Cordoba with top innovation hubs. We want to connect. We are now connecting here. We have Rebecca One working with our Govin in the other room. She was last year in the TCI Global Conference. We met her there. So there we're connecting to the innovation hub of Silicon Valley. We also started some connections with Germany, India, and Singapore. This is not a tech agenda. It's a productivity, new business model, jobs, and transformation agenda. We believe Cordoba can lead, but not by having all the answers, but by moving with courage and building. We know that AI is moving fast, and we are jumping in with both feet. I think that's the idea, the idea for this year work fundamentally.
Thanks, Natalia. It's really true what you're saying about standing still is not an option. So actually being proactive in some of these policies, and even if it is, we're not quite sure what we're doing, but we're going to try something. I think that's a really important aspect of, if we're going to try and address some of these challenges, we need to be doing something. So really useful to see that. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, we've been looking out to see what the challenges are. We have across TCI and within your regions already some cluster actors and some cluster initiatives that were already in place. And so I'm really interested to know what your ask is of them. You've described that to a certain extent, but more specifically, how are they contributing? How are they stepping up to the plate to help you address these wider policy challenges? I'm going to go to Natalia first this time, to see how your clusters in the region are stepping up to that challenge.
Okay, we see clusters not as structures, but as living ecosystems where companies, universities, talent, and government come together to make change happen. In this moment of disruption, our expectation is simple. Clusters must be the launch pads of transformation. We talked about a lot of this in the TCI meeting last year. They help us spot real problems that maybe AI can solve. Also, they help us build trust between actors. Third, they help us move faster than traditional institutions can. And that's already happening in Cordoba. I can give the example of BIM cluster. It's a great example. It's transforming the construction industry through digital tools and now with AI. Companies from these clusters are already exporting services to US, Spain, and the Middle East. They are scaling globally, and that started with a shared vision and strong collaboration. Elsewhere, we are seeing AI being tested in agriculture, bioenergy, and even public services. We try to keep it with clusters at the center. That makes this powerful. What makes this powerful is the mindset shift from waiting for change to making change happen. In Cordoba, we don't expect clusters to be perfect, but we do expect them to be brave, to explore, test, fall, and try again, to build solutions that boost productivity, open new markets, and create better jobs. And all this with the mindset of sustainability. We also believe this has to be bottom up. We're working closely with local majors, small, medium enterprises, and community leaders to co-design value change that are connected to global trends, but deeply rooted in local identity. And at the end of the day, we're using clusters to answer this question: how do we transform our economy without leaving our people behind? We think that's the real transformation, and we're just getting started.
Thanks, Natalia. I love the description of clusters as a living ecosystem, because they do morph and change and adapt, and they can be quite fleet of foot. So it's a real opportunity for them to do something different. Annie, how are you seeing this in Flanders?
Put the mic on first, that will work better. What we see, well, cluster, at least in Flanders, our cluster initiatives are driven by companies, and companies are economic actors. They look for economic added value. They design together a roadmap to find a common direction among the members of the cluster organization, but it's quite result oriented. The economic added value, they look for that competitiveness in the industry. So that's the starting point. But then the cluster organization, they develop trust for the companies, trusted by the companies, trust between the companies, but also with the research organizations, with the whole innovation system. They are a trusted partner. They are seen as a neutral and a trusted partner. This is very important because now they can connect research to the application, as Stephen said before, as we said before. What clusters are doing, they bring challenges from the government, global challenges, but also company challenges, economic challenges, to the research organization. So this middleman acting as a connecting point between industry and research is very important as this trusted partner. But as they now are a trusted partner, they can also look beyond the economic added value, and they can also look to other global challenges, because a lot of these global challenges will also have economic solutions. If there's no economic solution, if it's not bringing added value for a number of organizations, it will not exist, or not for a long time exist. So that's very important, that they bring also economic solutions for the social transformations. So that's important, why you need these companies, and you cannot go outside and talk to 400 companies. But the cluster, as a trusted partner, they can pick the 20, 30 companies most interested in developing or in working on it. So that's the importance of this trusted partner. So as I say, they keep a focus on these economic solutions, but also work on these social transformations. Maybe I can express this more clearly by giving an example. How can you develop energy efficiency in a social housing neighborhood? Well, those people, they rent the buildings. They are not interested in investing in this rental house. So that's difficult. So we have to involve companies that can be paid by those who own these houses. So, and then they develop the technologies for renovation, or they study these energy communities. But it's important that you involve politics, because they will have to pay part of this investment, so that they be involved from the start on. But it's also important that the people who live in that neighborhood are involved. So that's, again, from triple helix to this multiple helix, because if you develop a system for energy efficiency and the system says you have to keep all doors closed all day, well, for families with small children, that's not a good solution. So you have to think about those obvious things. But of course, this one will never happen. But that's why you need the users, the end users involved. And then you approach your global challenge, and you can develop an economic solution that is find very good and accepted by the people who have to implement it, and by the people who have to live in it. So that's important, to have this economic solutions for these social challenges.
Thanks, Hanny. I think
that's how we see our clusters acting in this field.
I would say I think it's really interesting that it's more than economic, but it's not instead of. It's that wider thing. It's a yes and that we're looking for, that economic return and the social value that we're trying to address it through this challenge. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Finally, Stephen, on this question, how is the clusters responding to the additional asks that you're putting in their direction?
Thank you. And some great points by Natalia and Annie. So certainly in the Canadian context, the expectations that we're putting on the clusters are that, in return for, relatively significant economic financial contribution, the expectation is that the clusters follow up with ambitious implementation of this approach. Our sense has been that we're putting a lot of trust in these organizations, setting them up as independent, not-for-profit entities. The federal government, we don't even have a member on the board of directors of these organizations, and so we're not involved in the decision making. We're not putting our thumb on the scales and influencing the decisions that come out. So if you don't, if project participants don't like the fact that they weren't selected or that their project wasn't given the green light, don't complain to the government. This is your own organization that is, basically has representation from across the ecosystem, and there is a very rigorous adjudication process so that if projects are put forward for consideration, that they are assessed on their merits and that they're given the green light or not on the basis of the strength of the proposal and of course the money that's available. But in return for this, we do expect that that the money is being leveraged in a way that is really trying to push the envelope. And so, for example, in the Canadian context, when we evolved the program from it being focused on supporting, pan-Canadian collaboration and so on, when we changed that focus towards also developing global ambitions with our global innovation cluster, how do Canadian innovators make connections across the country, but then with a view to implanting those solutions, finding markets overseas, being able to play within the global economy rather than just within our own backyard. We're seeing now some of the fruits of those efforts. So for example, last week I was in Germany at an event called Hannover Messe, which is the largest advanced manufacturing industrial trade fair in the world. And Canada had a delegation there led by one of our global innovation clusters that had 250 or so companies that were exhibiting as part of this event. Canada was the featured country, the partner country at this initiative. We had high-level representation there and so on. But most of the recruiting of participating companies, of delegates and so on, that was led by our cluster. So it's not that government officials are trying to work the phones to convince people pretty pleased to come and be part of this. Instead, it was led by our cluster saying, this is a huge opportunity for Canada to expand in Europe and elsewhere. Here is what the value proposition is for companies to be part of this initiative. And a lot of that recruiting and the work on the ground to be able to build support and then lead that delegation was in fact coming from our cluster. And so that's the kind of impact and buy-in that we're hoping for. And we also try and do that in the other direction. And so, for example, one of our other clusters, our AI supply chain cluster, they have in turn, started over the past 2 or 3 years hosting Canada's now largest AI conference of exhibitors and technology solution providers and so on. And so from scratch, they're not only taking the role of supporting innovation, but organizing some of the keynote or keystone events within our ecosystem to continue to drive that collaboration. So we're also, of course, saying don't just attend events or create new calendar events, but also how can we measure that? And as we all know, that's challenging. But all of them are doing their post-event surveys and so on. How many connections have you made? How many of those have led to financial transactions or additional customers and so on? And trying to do all of that post work to make sure that if we're again making big investments, that these are things that we're tracking and that we're ensuring are paying dividends. Maybe I'll close by talking a little bit about the expectations of the clusters in terms of moving beyond project execution to economic impact. And so, for example, it's tempting as a government program administrator to say, aha, we gave you this much money. How many projects did you do with it? How many partners were there? And what were the outcomes of that particular project? But in many cases, it's even more interesting to say, and then beyond that projects, what were the spin-off effects and the benefits? So, for example, we'll give a case where in Canada, we had a challenge that was identified related to supply chain things where in our port of Montreal, which is one of Canada's larger marine ports, there was an identified challenge just for HR, for assigning work schedules for employees, because there was very poor forecasting ability to know how many ships would be coming into port in a given day, how many would need to be unloaded, so how many employees and dock workers you would need, and how many logistics people you would need to have lined up. If you had too few, then that of course led to backups. If you had too many, then you're paying people to be there but not be fully utilized. So through one of our collaborative innovation projects, an AI solution providing company was working with the Port Authority in Montreal to develop their forecasting methodology and their algorithms and so on, to be able to move from maybe 24-hour visibility of what the HR requirements would be to up to 3 weeks ahead of time, being able to forecast with much greater precision how many ships were likely to be in port, and what the schedule would need to be for employees to be able to be optimally staffed. So what we've seen is not just that was successful in being deployed in Canada, but now hearing that the company that was involved that developed this HR foresight capability has now, through the work of our cluster, engaged some partners in Europe, most recently in France, and has now signed a contract with Port du Havre, the biggest port in France, to be able to deploy the same technology. So we're able to see that the hope of policymakers is that we're moving from fostering innovation and collaboration and so on, to being able to help smaller technology leaders be able to develop a solution, to deploy it, and then to be able to find follow-on customers, including internationally, which helps to build things out. So that's the kind of thing that we're really hoping to build on going forward. And I think, speaking optimistically, I think we're on a good track to be able to have more of those positive success stories to point to.
Thanks, Stephen. Really, some really good and powerful examples from all three speakers about the role of the cluster acting as this trusted partner, making those connections and moving into that almost strategic leadership role, where they're playing a role within the ecosystem, pulling the strings and making the connections between the different actors. So that's really good to hear that clusters are taking up that role. Thanks for that discussion. I'm going to hand over to Emily Wise, really, just to lead on a few reflections and then opening it up to discussions.
Thanks so much, Madeline, and thanks so much to all the speakers for going through some very broad questions and raising the kind of the importance of the new transformational challenges that need to be addressed and how clusters are actively working with them. I'm going to take, yes, let me introduce myself first. I am a researcher at Lund University. I've been working on researching clusters and collaborative governance, and together with James and Madeline on the topic of evaluating these collaborative infrastructures and what value they're delivering for the past 20 years now. I've been affiliated with TCI and working with the TCI network and with James and Madeline in particular over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years. It's a really fun group, and the TCI network gives a lot of food for thought and moving forward in our thinking on these things. I've really appreciated all the speakers' interventions, and I'm going to try to sum up the highlights, some of the highlights from the discussion. On the first question, we were talking about the challenges that are faced that require transformation and the policies that are being initiated to address them. And we heard a lot about challenges with digital transformation and broader industrial transformation, and how these new technologies are being integrated and spread and used, applied through the clusters, kind of being channeled and put out. But we also heard about challenges and related to more social and environmental challenges, and how the participants, how the speakers were relating how clusters are being used not only as launch pads for transformation and application of technology, but this translator role, not only working left to right and bringing innovation to the market, but also acting right to left and understanding what challenges and opportunities are on the market and need to be addressed, and translating those into collaborative action and bringing them back home and working on solutions together that can be not only developed, as Stephen was saying, but also deployed and scaled on the market. And these are fantastic examples of how cluster initiatives are being used. In addition, we heard a lot about how the cluster initiatives are working beyond their traditional triple helix and integrating both investors and civil society and even citizens in the work, which requires perhaps new approaches in how they're working with kind of rigging collaborative innovation projects. And we heard about kind of more attention to the demand side, as Annie was saying, kind of this demand orientation and translating these demands. Before I open up to questions from the audience, and I already have two that I've gotten from the chat and previous input, I'm going to ask you to just remind you, you can pose questions in the chat, but you can also raise your hand. But to get us woken up and engaged, I'd like to pose some questions to all participants through a poll in Zoom. So I'm going to ask Patricia's help in launching the first poll question, which is, where in the world are you based? If you can just point out your continent. Oh, we already see a map of where in the world people are based. We have a huge number from Europe, but also in Africa and Latin America. We have North Americans participating, and we have several from Asia and Oceania. We have global representation today. So this is very interesting. We can move to the next poll question. In your geography, are you experiencing challenges that require transformation? Here we have the answer to the first question. In your geography, are you experiencing challenges that require transformation? Are you experiencing digital transformation challenges with automation, digitalization, and automation industry 4.0, transformation for environmental sustainability, for security, resilience, and/or social sustainability? Or no particular challenges that require broader transformation? There's a lot with the digital transformation, really high number with environmental sustainability, also quite high with security, resilience, and/or social sustainability. So nobody's in the clear. There are emerging challenges all over the place. It's no simple, let's just work on taking innovation to market and increasing global competitiveness. Thanks so much. A final question, which I have my hypothesis of how this will end up. The final question, in your geography, are clusters and collaborative innovation ecosystems one of the tools being used to address these transformative challenges? And I'm finding it interesting that the yeses aren't higher, in fact. And it kind of leads me to question, is it because there are no kind of formed cluster initiatives? As James was pointing out, it's not necessarily that there are structured cluster initiatives and cluster organizations leading the charge, or perhaps there are no policies that support these collaborative infrastructures from forming, or these policy initiatives, as Natalia was saying, that are in Argentina that are kind of catalyzing these digital transformations. Thanks so much for participating in the group questioning and the polling. And now that we're all warmed up, I am looking for hands and also for questions in the chat. And I'm going to start with posing a first question that Linda Jameson from Invest Northern Ireland has already posed in the chat. And I see 2 hands raised after this first question, which I will pose, which is from Linda at Invest NI in relation to this discussion of the mobilization of actors and how we need to reach beyond the triple helix. Could panelists share their thoughts on the shift in thinking from the triple helix to the pentahelix model, including entrepreneurs and investors, and how policies or how your programs might be changing to shift and encourage this kind of broader collaborative infrastructure? And I'll just ask you to open your mic and speak out if you feel like speaking out. Annie.
We've seen shifts like even in European programs like sustainable transport, where there's really foreseen that you involve your community, your public, the policy maker, because if you have to change something in your mobility plans, well, the local community or the province or the country, the region has to be involved. And now we find a way that we also can, in a R&D project, that we can also finance these people. So that's important to have them collaborate, because they are all busy with day-to-day business, and they have to do the work that they have to do. If they have additional tasks to follow up research projects and to follow up meetings, to be involved in where the research is going, well, they have to spend time on that. And if you cannot finance them, if you can only finance your economic actors in a program, it's not working. So that's a way we handle now more involvement, is by also foreseeing some financing for these partners in a project.
Thanks, Annie. And I'm going to move to next questions because I want to ensure that questions come up. And if I don't get to your question, if you post it in the chat, we are writing things down and we'll try to get back to you. But I'm going to turn to some hands raised. I see Abdul Aziz Saeed Atume. I'm sorry if I massacred your name. I'm going to open your mic and ask you to pose your question.
Is the mic on?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. First for this initiative and for the opportunity to attend this very important webinar. So my name is Abdulaziz Said Atuman. I'm from Comoros Island. I'm the national coordinator for UNIDO project here, which is in support to SMEs competitiveness development. To be able to sell quality goods in Comoros and abroad. So we have been working at present strengthening the capacity, the professionalism and competitiveness of individual SMEs. And we came to realize that now that they do have the strategies, they do have the products, but the next challenge is really to access to the market. And in that respect, we are now working toward clusterization in order to leverage collective power to conquer the international market. So I had 2 questions. The first one, I think maybe Stefan already touch base a little bit on it, but he could still elaborate. What we found is that many clusters initiatives have suffered in Africa and including in Comoros from short-term horizons and limited sustainability. So what would be the governance mechanisms that could ensure continuity beyond donor support? That is my first question. And the second question is that most of the clusters that are implemented in Africa are geared toward participation in the global value chain rather than the regional value chain, creating a lot of dependencies. So how could the cluster policies be designed to strengthen intra-African value chain participation rather than reinforcing external dependencies? Thank you.
Two quite big questions. Stephen, I saw you open your mic. Would you like to start
Sure.
off?
Why don't I just jump in on that? So thanks very much for the question and a very interesting context that you're, coming from. So in the Canadian context, I'd say what we're trying to do with value chains is, I think, for example, related to artificial intelligence, many different companies and countries are trying to navigate how to leverage this technology, but sort of wondering whether the solution is just to buy an off-the-shelf solution, from, in many cases, US provider. So if it's Amazon Web Services or if it's OpenAI or something like that, in many cases, the AI solution would end up, not necessarily benefiting the local ecosystem, but instead be further purchasing a solution off the shelf from an established legacy provider. So that could be a cost-effective approach on the one hand, because you're using a very common approach that has a bit of international currency. But what we're finding is that in the case of Canada, we have many AI professionals and researchers, a number of whom have won the Nobel Prize or whatever for their formative research in developing some of the AI capabilities and algorithms and the underlying science. So we're wondering, can we use programming like our cluster initiative to be able to help reach out to those data scientists and some of those theoretical experts to say, if we were to almost develop a solution in-house, what would that look like? And then can we ensure that those individuals who are developing that solution keep the intellectual property? And once they've developed a solution for this use case, can they then use that as a basis for marketing and selling it in other contexts? So it's not a guarantee that it'll be successful going forward, but in terms of developing our own supply chains and our own innovation ecosystem, that's a bit of the effort. We know for certain companies, if you're a small, we call them mom and pop shop or something, where you're a small firm, of course, maybe it's easiest to just buy off the shelf a solution for your accounting software, your demand forecasting something, you go for that. But if it's a medium or a large sized firm that has a particular boutique approach or something, maybe that's then worth developing an in-house solution. So that's what we're trying to work on a bit. And I guess for the question of how to build regional supply chains, I think what we've built into our program is that that requirement that you have at least one small or medium-sized company that is part of every funded project. But then also try and bring in some of those medium to larger size firms, which are often having deeper pockets and are able to contribute some of their matching funding to the project. So it means it's not fully subsidized by government. Instead, it's matched by private sector demand. So we're trying to orchestrate the intervention so that it ensures it benefits some of the smaller players, that it crowds in participation and investment from larger firms, that we try and have the intellectual property retained by that smaller company so that they can then ladder up a bit. So maybe that touches on a few of the questions that you posed, but I recognize there's a lot more we could get into as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hi,
Stephen.
But I recognize the
Hello,
screen.
Rebecca. So nice to see you.
here we have a little surprise. She's working for us, working with us here in Cordoba today. So
yes, hi, nice to see you all. Just wanted to say hi. This is one of the reasons why TCI is such a powerful network. We met in Chihuahua, and here I am in Cordoba talking to her team about how to better implement AI in innovation and efficiency gains here in the cluster. So nice to
Thanks
see
so
you
much
all.
for saying hi again. Nice to see you again, Rebecca. Thanks.
Sorry to disrupt the session, but
we have to go on with the government session. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So we only have 4 minutes left, and there are at least 5 questions. I have one big question that I really want to get on before we wind up, but I see Bob Bro in our board of advisors, maybe the longest term member of TCI on board, but I've seen also Michael Enright was online as well. But Bob, do you have a quick question? And then I'm gonna speed one last question in before we need to wrap up.
It's not a question, it's a challenge. That
Okay, issue us a
the
challenge.
clusters, think of your cooperation and integration at a industry level. You compete and you cooperate, and you all have different governments and different ecosystems and what have you. And so now I'm using it at an international level for the United Nations to create a same concept of cooperation and competitiveness. It's okay if you are a socialist government, a dictator, a democratic, and what have you, but we can cooperate and compete. A different concept, but lots to do it. I have 14 pages written on it. Bye.
Oh, great. Thanks, Bob. Thanks. We're always up for issuing new challenges and something else for us to work on at our next policy dialogue or at the next global conference. One final question, and then I'm going to hand over to Patricia for final words. And this is a big question. And so panelists, get at your buzzers, and you can maybe say a few quick words on this. This is a question from Julia Mitchell from the Scottish Funding Council. What methods or approaches have you used to demonstrate the impact of clusters in wider innovation ecosystems? This wider ask that is being made, how have you been able to demonstrate the impact? So each of the panelists, if you could just say a couple words. Annie.
What we have done in Flanders, we had a professor in economics studying this cluster effect of being a member of a cluster organization. Does it affect your productivity? And so what they did, they had a group of companies being member of the cluster, and they had a comparable group of companies not being member of the cluster. And then they look how the productivity changes over years, and they have to eliminate the effect that maybe your most productive companies become member of the cluster. So there's this economic difference by difference in difference methodology that has won a Nobel Prize, which I have difficulties to explain, but it was organized in a proper way with these economics professor at the University of Leuven. And they came out that you can clearly see a benefit of being a member on the productivity, but it's, of course, it's still, well, is there a causality between being a member and productivity, or the other way around? So it's really difficult, because being a member of a cluster organization is just one element in the productivity of a company. So, but they showed that it was important that cluster members have a higher productivity than non-cluster members compared to a peer group of companies.
Thanks, Annie. And I don't think we have time to take on Stephen and Natalia's responses to this very complicated question. So we're going to have it as a cliffhanger. We're going to have to address this at the next events of TCI. And Patricia, could you please tell us about those?
So first of all, thank you very much. This was a great conversation. Thank you to the 3 speakers and the great 3 facilitators. The good thing in TCI is that there is always something next. So I have here some commercial on what is next. As you see, our global conference has been, well, always the the starting point of many interesting things. And this year we're going to meet in the island of Ireland in October. Please save the dates. And well, the call for proposals is about to open, so get ready to share your work, and we hope to see you in the program and in the conference of TCI. 28 years of conferences, and we are happy of what we leave behind and what we build next. And more specifically on cluster policies, we will continue this conversation in a policy workshop that we are going to have in June in Hungary, in Budapest. So please also book the dates, and we will keep you posted with more detail. And if you have ideas of themes or questions that are urgent to you and that you want us to tackle, just share with us, and we will include them in our programs. And the TCI Asia conference, of course, next summer is also, it's going to be in Mongolia, in Ulaanbaatar. We collaborate with the MOC network there, and well, we also, if you are in this part of the world, we also hope to see you there. And next, I just wanted to make a very short reminder that this is a network of members. So all the people that you see here, they are active members of the TCI network. I see today we had a lot of interest for this webinar. Actually, we had more than 190 registrants. I think many of you will follow up afterwards, so welcome also to the discussion and by the recording or the material that you will revisit later on. But I want to encourage you to be part of this global conversation and this global network of members of the TCI network. Here you have the details, and if you want more information, I'm here to support you and to explain you how we can bring value to your cluster work daily. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hand over, Emily, to you again if you want to do the closing.
Well, just thanks again, and we've written down some questions in the chat, and we will keep the conversation following on at next times. And thanks from all of us, and thanks to all the speakers again for all of the examples.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you all.